Welcome to the Megillah Project.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
There are a lot of things that are special, both about the Megillah, the book of Esther, and about the holiday of Purim. One, of course, of which is the fact that the name of God doesn't appear explicitly in the entire book of Esther. And there's something about the whole story as well as the whole holiday that seems almost irreligious, irreverent. And there's, of course, the aspects of the story and the aspects of the holiday that are silly and frivolous that seem so different from other Jewish holidays and traditions. There's also the fact that it's one of the few holidays and one of the few biblical books that don't have a direct connection to the land of Israel. The holiday and the story don't take place in the land of Israel, and they aren't about journeying to or from the land of Israel. There's also something else about the Megillah and the holiday of Purim that a lot of people don't know, and that is that according to the Jewish tradition, the holiday of Purim is one of the few holidays and possibly the only holiday that will remain in the Jewish calendar, even in the Messianic era. And the Megillah is the only book outside of the Torah that will still be read publicly in the Messianic age. Why is that? Let's go take a look-see and we'll explore. In Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, when he discusses the halachot, the laws regarding the scroll of Esther, the Megillah, and the laws regarding Hanukkah, Maimonides writes, all prophetic books and the sacred writings, the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, the parts of the Bible outside of the Torah, will cease to be recited in public during the Messianic era, except the book of Esther. It will continue to exist, just as the 5 books of the Torah and the laws of the Oral Torah that will never cease. Although ancient troubles will be remembered no longer, as it is written, the troubles of the past are forgotten and hidden from my eyes, Isaiah 65, the days of Purim will not be abolished. As it is written, these days of Purim shall never be repealed among the Jews, and the memory of them shall never cease from their descendants. Esther chapter 9, verse 28. Well, this is very interesting. So what Maimonides is saying here is based on things that appear before in the Jerusalem Talmud, not in the Babylonian Talmud, and also in a Midrash in Mishlei chapter 9 in the book of Proverbs. You can look those up, but I want to focus on Maimonides and how Maimonides relates to the Megillah. So let's take a look at that verse, which comes towards the very end of the 10 chapters of the Megillah. The book of Esther, chapter 9, verse 28 says, consequently, these days are recalled and observed in every generation, by every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim shall never cease among the Jews, and the memory of them shall never perish among their descendants. So first of all, it seems to make sense. The Megillah itself says that Purim will always be remembered and the story will always be told. So therefore, it must always continue. But similar things could be said about just about any other Jewish holiday, any other Jewish book that talks about how they must be recited and remembered and recalled, whether it's the Passover story that we need to remember in every generation, or any other holiday or Jewish book, pretty much. There seems to be something in here that's hinting, or that Maimonides is hinting to, right, in this reference to Isaiah, that there's this idea that in the Messianic era, all of the salvations of the past, as well as the pains of the past, are going to be forgotten because the pains of the pre-Messianic era and the celebration and the salvation of the Messianic era are going to be so immense that all of the pains and celebrations that came before aren't going to be relevant, except for Purim, for some reason. So this question continues to be explored. Why is it that Purim is deemed to be so eternal beyond these mysterious reasons that seem to be hinted at here? One explanation that's given is that so much of Purim is about the hidden nature of God, right? The name Esther means hidden in Hebrew. And it's possible that in this messianic era, God's presence is going to be so apparent everywhere that we're going to need the book of Esther in order to remember what it was like to not sense God's presence everywhere, to not sense miracles in the divine in all places and time. I kind of like that idea, but I think there's something else about the book of Esther that's important. And I think I've only really realized that over the last few months. So I teach at the Bina Secular Yeshiva in Tel Aviv, and over the last few months, I've had the challenge and the pleasure of leading a seminar on Jewish peoplehood for a group of Jewish young adults in the Bina Mechina. We have students from all over Israel, as well as students from around the Jewish world coming together. And in this seminar that I lead once a week, we talk about our relationship, the relationship between Israeli Jews and the diaspora, the relationship between diaspora Jews and Israel, the relationship between Israeli Jews and the diaspora. And something that's come up again and again in these workshops is that many diaspora Jews have spent a lot of time thinking about their relationship with Israel, talking about their relationship with Israel, visiting Israel, learning about Israel. But a lot of Israeli Jews have never really thought about their relationship to the diaspora. They've never really learned about diaspora Jews, except, of course, learning about anti-Semitism and Zionism and diaspora Jews and their relationship to Israel and their yearning to come to Israel. And, you know, it makes sense when you think about it, right? All of the holidays that they observe and they celebrate, both the Jewish holidays and the national holidays, are all about Israel and the relationship to the land of Israel. All of the stories they read, whether from the Bible or outside of the Bible, are about Israel, the connection to the land of Israel, or longing for the land of Israel, or being exiled from the land of Israel and striving to return to the land of Israel. I almost feel like we could create this new diaspora Bechdel test of Israeli Jewish Hebrew literature and stories. Where can we find a Jewish story in Hebrew for Israelis where we have two diaspora Jews talking to one another about a subject other than Israel or their relationship with Israel? Purim and the Megillah, I think, is one of the few stories that actually might pass that test. So I think there's a lot of things that Israeli Jews in particular can learn from further exploration of the Megillah. So I think the Megillah and Purim are notable for a number of reasons with regards to learning about the diaspora. Yes, we know that there's anti-Semitism and hatred and threats to Jews in the Purim story, but that's not what it's all about. And at the end, it's not anti-Semitism that prevails. Here we have a story about Jews living in the diaspora. It's also during the Persian Empire. So it seems that perhaps these Jews are Jews that have chosen to remain in the diaspora, even after the Persian kingdom allowed the Jews to return to Zion. But that can be debated. But we have Jews living in the diaspora, struggling with everyday struggles of living in the diaspora, how to stay together as a community, how to integrate into their local society while at the same time preserving their sense of Jewish identity and community. We have Jews that have non-Jewish friends, are rising to great positions of power and pride within the Persian Empire, right? So many aspects of day-to-day life in the diaspora that don't have to do directly with one's relationship to the land of Israel. Not that a relationship with Israel isn't important, but there's much more to diaspora existence than one's relationship to Israel. The other interesting thing about the Purim story is that it's a story where the diaspora prevails. The Jewish life in the diaspora succeeds and continues to thrive through its adaptability and through its challenges and through its beauty and through its diversity. It's not a story of failure of diaspora Judaism and this great redemption where everybody comes and goes to the land of Israel. It's a story of success and celebration of diaspora. So I think there are a lot of things that Israelis can learn from the story, and I think that also diaspora Jews and Israelis can gain from exploring the story together through the lens of Jewish peoplehood. Beyond this exploration of what does it mean to live in the diaspora, I think there are certain values and elements of diaspora life that exist in this story. First of all, the element of humor. Jewish humor is something that's so essential to the life of every Jew who lives in the diaspora. I mean, if we couldn't laugh at ourselves and laugh at the world around us, I don't think we'd be able to get through the days as diaspora Jews. It's interesting, in studies that have been done of American Jews, specifically the Pew study of American Jews, 42% of American Jews felt that to them personally, having a sense of humor was an essential component of what it means to be Jewish. When the same question was asked of Israelis in a Pew study a few years later, only 9% of Israelis felt that having a sense of humor was an essential component of being Jewish. Not that they didn't necessarily have a sense of humor, but they didn't associate that with Judaism. And I think something about the whole story of the Megillah and the festival of Purim that's so overblown and so exaggerated and self-deprecating, making fun of ourselves, making fun of our friends, making fun of our enemies, is a key element of Jewish survival that I think might be missing from Israeli life when we tend to take ourselves a little bit too seriously. I think the Purim story and the Megillah also explore the importance of flexibility, adaptability, compromise. In other parts of the Torah, we read about the laws and how you have to follow the laws. And in the story of Purim, we see a Jewish community. Well, we see a Jewish woman who is being wed to a non-Jewish king. We realize that sometimes you have to make compromises in order to survive, which I think is very different from the story of Hanukkah, which is about willing to sacrifice your life for your principles. I think the story of Purim is about sometimes we need to be flexible in our principles in order to survive, because without Jews, there can be no Judaism. There's also something in the Purim story, I think, that invites a certain amount of non-judgment and inclusion. I think when one is in a position of power, in a position of majority, it's very easy to judge others and to deem who's in and who's out. But when you're a small community in the diaspora, when you're a minority struggling every day for your survival, I think that it demands a certain greater level of acceptance and inclusion. Because if you started keeping people out for this and that and this and that, well, then you wouldn't have a Jewish community at the end of the day. So what can we learn from all this diasporic holiday and this very diasporic book? Well, I think let's look at the month of Iyar, for example. 2 months after the holiday of Purim is the month of Iyar, where we have Israeli Independence Day, Yom HaAtzmaut. And in Jewish communities and Jewish schools around the world, we wear blue and white, we wave Israeli flags, we sing Israeli songs, we learn about Israel, we eat Israeli food or pseudo-Israeli food. What would it look like if around the holiday of Purim, or perhaps even the whole month of Adar, Jews throughout the world, including Jews in Israel, waved the flags of Jewish communities in the diaspora and dressed up as diaspora Jews and learned about diaspora Jews and ate diaspora Jewish food? I feel like that would maybe do a little something to change the dynamic, to show diaspora Jews, yes, Jerusalem is always in our hearts, but not necessarily every minute of every day. And there's more to diaspora Jewish existence than thinking about the land of Israel. And it would maybe be helpful for Israelis to learn that there's more to Jewish existence than the land of Israel. Wouldn't that just turn things on their head just a little bit?